Special Agent in charge of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Office of Inspector General for the Northeast. Now, what that very long title means is that I was responsible for all major criminal investigations involving the VA hospitals from West Virginia to Maine. And I had 5 officers that reported to me, and there was a lot of work, because, you know, hospitals are like small cities. And there's a lot of crime that can occur in a hospital before we even get to this. You know, if you think about what goes on in the hospital, if you think about all the procurement, if you think about all the medical records, all the science that's involved, a lot could go on in the hospital. And that's what I was involved with day in and day out, until all of a sudden I got a call that kind of changed my life. All of a sudden I got a call about a doctor who was suspected of killing our nation's heroes right out here at the Northport VA Medical Center. And we're going to talk about that. As a matter of fact, it's not just the VA. You know, these cases have gone on throughout the world. So let's take a little trip around the world, shall we, and see like what's happening recently and some right now as we speak. All right? German nurse charged with 97 more murders at a hospital. Excuse me? 97 more murders? How many people did he kill that we're now adding 97 to that number? 97 murders. Well, I can tell you, because I'm familiar with this case, because I work with the German police on it, we actually suspect he killed about 300 patients. We can't really prove it, all right? But he admitted to killing over 100 patients in the 3 different hospitals that he worked in.
In Germany.
In Germany. Italy. Italy's such a beautiful country, isn't it? But let's take a look at this case. You see, her name is Danielle Pagliatti. You know what she used to like to do, Danielle? She used to like to take a selfie with herself and the patient she had just murdered.
Oh.
Danielle Pagliatti. And these are all fairly recent cases, okay? Here's the last VA case. Rita Mays, sentenced to 11 to 7 consecutive life terms, plus 20 years for killing 7 of our nation's heroes at the VA hospital in West Virginia. Okay? Now, how many of you have seen that this has been all over the newspapers recently? How many of you have seen this about this nurse, right, in England? Lucy Letby? Well, we're going to talk about that case later in detail. Accused and convicted of killing babies in her care. Babies. Not the only one. Not the only nurse that was convicted of killing babies, okay? Here's one that's ongoing right now as we speak. Right now as we speak in beautiful North Carolina. This is what's going on. Killed 2 patients with lethal doses of insulin. And we're going to talk about insulin because insulin seems to be the #1 murder weapon of medical serial killers. Not the only one, but #1. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Let's stop right now. I always thought you go to a hospital to get better. You don't go to a hospital to first become a victim of crime, right? I mean, God forbid, if you're assaulted or something terrible happens, you go to a hospital, what? To get better, not to first become a victim of crime. You know, I always looked at a hospital sort of as a sanctuary from crime, right? And I'm not the only one who thought that. Because in 1947, the U.S. Navy launched this ship. It's a hospital ship. And they said, Admiral, why did you name your hospital ship the USS Sanctuary? And the Admiral said, that's what a hospital is. It's a sanctuary, right? It's a shelter from danger or hardship, a place of refuge, comfort, and security. But let me ask you this question. If you're so inclined to commit a number of murders, what location and what profession might you choose? Okay. Well, first of all, you want to choose a profession that has the legal power of life and death over someone. And what professions do we know have that? Well, sometimes a police officer, and some serial killers have masqueraded themselves as police officers or security officers. But what other professions do we know have that power of life and death over people? You want to work in a profession where you take an oath, and all your co-workers take an oath to protect and serve, and have dedicated their lives to helping people. So who is going to suspect that somebody in such a wonderful group of people, such a professional group of people who have dedicated their lives to this, there's someone actually intent on murdering somebody? You want to choose a profession where the family and the victim trust you implicitly. Listen to that nurse, sweetheart. Listen to that doctor. They have your best interest in mind. And of course, 99.999% of the time, they do have your best interest in mind. Okay? Now look, let me just preface the rest of my remarks by saying this. The overwhelming majority of healthcare providers are the most honest, hardworking, dedicated professionals I have ever met. You know, you have to be smart and you have to be compassionate. So what a group of wonderful people if someone's so intent on abusing a position like that. All right? How about this one? You ever go into an emergency room and see this really big, tough construction worker who's really tough on the outside, terrified of this little nurse coming over with this needle to give him an injection? And you know what? We don't ask questions because we're not feeling well. We just accept whatever treatment we're getting. So you could be the strongest and toughest man or woman on the street, but when you go in a hospital, all of a sudden, we sort of become the meek and mild. All right? Now look, you know how tough it is to find nurses in some parts of this country? Why, we have to go all the way to the Philippines or Ireland. And you know what? If we ever made friends with North Korea, we'd take some of them too. Because there's such a shortage. It's a very tough profession. Like I said, you have to be strong, smart, and tough, and dedicated. It's a very tough profession. There's a very high burnout rate. So you know what? If we didn't do such a good job on their background investigation, well, excuse me, we're lucky we even found somebody. We're lucky especially in some parts of rural America, we're lucky we even found this doctor. We're lucky we even found this nurse. So if we didn't do such a great background investigation, well, forgive me. At least we got somebody, right? Now look, if somebody, God forbid, dies here in the library, well, there's going to be a big investigation. It's going to be on Channel 12 News. It's going to be a big story. Somebody dies in a nursing home or a hospital, is that news? No, that's a common everyday occurrence, right? Ambulances and hearse, I mean, it's a common everyday occurrence. You see where I'm getting at? You see where I'm getting here? How about this? You ever go in a hospital ward around 3 o'clock in the morning? Not much going on. Most of the families are gone, all right? So what I could do is just go on that ward and take that curtain and put that curtain behind me and the patient, and no one is going to see what's going on, and there's no camera that's going to show what's going on because we have laws that don't allow cameras in these places, all right? So if you could work alone at night and no one's there and you could curtain yourself off, this is getting to be a pretty good place to maybe commit something terrible, okay? Now look at this. You know what? Most cops don't become cops because we're good in chemistry and biology. Okay? So we're very, very dependent on the nurses and the doctors and the scientists because we don't really know what they're talking about half the time, all right? We don't understand the science. We don't really understand the administration. You know, where are the patient's records and how many departments? How do we get them? And the law. You know, what is this HIPAA law? This Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Is that, does that mean I need a subpoena for these records? Does that mean I need a court order? Does that mean that a judge has to sign something? I'm really, you know what, honestly, I really don't want to do an investigation in a hospital. That's like the last place I really want to do an investigation, okay? And what about if the victim cries out, hey, that nurse is trying to kill me? Oh, we don't pay any attention to that. We hear that all the time in the hospital. In fact, if the patient keeps saying that, what are we going to do? We're going to make a little notation in their chart that they're obviously suffering from the numerous effects of the multiple medications that they're on. And that's a real condition, by the way. It's a real condition. I'll show you in a minute. It's a real condition, okay? Okay, so I got the perfect job. I got the perfect location. So what do I do now? Smuggle in a gun or a knife to kill somebody? Well, there's no need to do that. Because the hospital supplies all the death-dealing chemicals you would ever need, some of which are still untraceable, particularly in embalmed tissue, even with today's modern toxicology. So here we go. Hallucinations in hospital pose risk to the elderly. Yes, it is a real condition, okay? Hospital delirium. Hospital delirium is a real condition. So when this patient claims that this nurse is trying to kill me, oh, that nurse isn't really trying to kill you. You're suffering from hospital delirium. You're hallucinating. We understand, dear. We understand, sweetheart. You're just hallucinating. And we're just going to put a little note in your chart about that. Okay? It's a real condition. But what about if that nurse or doctor really is trying to kill them? Well, who's going to believe that? In an environment like a hospital where all the co-workers have dedicated their lives to saving people, and there's a real condition that covers that claim that that nurse or doctor is actually trying to kill somebody. Particularly in the ICU. This goes on more in the ICU than anywhere, and many times that's where many of your murders actually occur, in the intensive care unit. See, Houston doctors grapple with the mystery diagnosis that affects survival. Is it real? Is that doctor really trying to kill him? Or is it this hospital delirium? Very interesting. Very interesting. But isn't it easier just to kind of write off hospital delirium than go through a whole investigation to see if the doctor and nurse is actually trying to kill somebody? So how do we find out about these cases? How did I find out about all these cases that I've worked on? Okay? Because I didn't work in a hospital. I worked in a law enforcement agency. Well, I tell you how we found out about them. We found out about them through the brave doctors and nurses that came forward at great risk, that came forward and told us about it, usually after they were completely poo-pooed by their own managers. Now, I didn't think that in the United States of America, you could be criminally prosecuted for being a whistleblower. But boy, was I wrong. Look at this case. Nurses criminally prosecuted for alleging physician wrongdoing. What? Don't we have laws that protect whistleblowers? I mean, we see them on the news all the time, right? Don't we have laws that protect them? Well, let me tell you what happened here in Kermit, Texas. Kermit, Texas is a small town in the oil basin area of Texas. It's Very hard to find doctors and nurses for Kermit, Texas, as you can imagine. Okay? These two nurses you see here in the picture, they were the entire compliance department of the hospital. And they said, you know what? This doctor, we think, is harming patients. We got to do something about it. So they go to management, and you know what management tells them? You know how hard it is to find doctors in Kermit, Texas? Why, we have to go all the way to the Philippines. You know the whole story. So I tell you what, nurses, just keep your mouth shut. Go back to your little compliance department and be happy you have a job. Because if you start saying that we have doctors here that are intentionally harming patients, we're all going to be out of work. You're all going to be out of work, and you're all going to be out of work. So just keep this to yourself, okay? But these nurses had too much integrity for that. Way too much integrity. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do now? So one nurse says, I have an idea. Let's send an anonymous letter to the state medical board about this doctor, okay? And they do that. And the doctor gets wind of it, and boy, is he pissed. So he calls the local sheriff, who happens to be one of his patients, and he says, Sheriff Roberts, I think these two women here are intentionally trying to harm my reputation, and I think they've somehow violated the law. And the sheriff says, don't worry, Doc, I'm on the case. And he actually gets a search warrant for their hospital computers. And he determines that they were the authors of the anonymous letter to the state, which he claimed had information about patients which should not have left the hospital, even though it went to state officials. He has them arrested and prosecuted. They lost their job. The hospital would not defend them. They had to pay for their own attorneys. The case actually goes to trial. Yep. The jury is out for about 20 minutes, and they come back and they say, what, are you kidding me? These nurses deserve a medal for what they did, not to be criminally prosecuted. But what kind of message does that send out to other whistleblowers out there, other whistleblowers in the medical community? Hey, did you hear about those two nurses in Texas? Did you hear what happened to them? Yeah, they blew the whistle. They lost their job. They got criminally prosecuted. Oh yeah, they won at the end. Do you want to go through all that? Because I don't want to go through all that. So what kind of message did that actually send to these very, very brave whistleblowers out here who, in spite of that, still have come forward? All right? Well, I tell you what you're going to do, nurse, because usually if I'm in management, I get a visit like this. Oh, Mr. Sackman, you know, we think that this nurse may be intentionally harming patients. Oh, really? Did you actually see this nurse harm patients? No, I didn't see this nurse harm patients. But you see, every time this nurse Bruce is on duty, the death rate goes up. Nurse Bruce takes a vacation, the death rate goes down. So what? Maybe Nurse Bruce has the toughest cases. Maybe there are legitimate reasons for that happening. But you know something, Mr. Manager? There's something else. These patients weren't expected to expire when they did. Some of them were actually improving, getting healthy, and then all of a sudden they expired. That's very interesting, nurse. I want to ask you a question. Now, you didn't actually see Nurse Bruce kill anybody. Now, is all your training up to snuff? I mean, is your health up to snuff? If we drug tested you right now, are we going to find any drugs in your system? I'm asking you that question because, you know, once you make allegations like this, you're sort of kind of under investigation yourself. So, you know what, just be prepared. And if you're still prepared, I tell you what we're going to do, just for you. We're going to appoint a board of our very special in-house, nobody from the outside, in-house doctors and nurses to review Nurse Bruce's cases, and we'll get back to you. Okay? So thank you very much for bringing this. And what do they say? You know, they come out with a report, and I've seen this throughout the world. They say, these patients all died as a result of their natural disease processes. That's why they're in the hospital. They were incredibly sick. And I'll tell you something, the first time, as a layperson, I looked in some of these veterans' medical folders. I mean, before electronic medical records, they were like this thick. And I said, gee, I didn't know you could be alive and have this much wrong with you. And I'm gonna have to actually prove that they were murdered. Because you see, it's so much easier to support the accused than it is to go forward with the accusations, all right? Listen, I'm concerned about the reputation of my hospital. You know, there was a hospital in New Jersey, I don't know if you heard of it, there was a hospital in New Jersey where one doctor was killing the patient of another doctor's, okay? Well, this case was in the newspapers, and you know what happened, nurse? That hospital changed their name 3 times and they still went out of business. So that means you're gonna lose your job, and you're gonna lose your job, and you're gonna lose your job. Are you sure you still wanna pursue this at this time? Are you really sure? Now, we talked about the nurse in England briefly, Lucy Ledby, all right? Well, look at this. Colleagues of convicted killer nurse Lucy Ledby had to apologize for warning hospital about dead babies on her watch. Not only did the management support her, they made the whistleblowers apologize to her for even bringing the allegations forward. How's that to encourage somebody to come? They had to actually apologize to her, and she was convicted of killing a number of babies. But the staff who first saw this was ordered by the managers to apologize to her because they're so worried about the reputation of the hospital, and the manager's worried about the reputation under his watch, okay? I tell you what else we're gonna do, just for you, nurse. On some occasions, we're gonna actually do an autopsy right here in the hospital. Now, a hospital autopsy is not a forensic autopsy. A hospital autopsy is a confirmatory autopsy. Could the patient have expired from one or more of his disease processes? Yes. Done. Okay? It's not like the autopsy you see on TV. It's not those forensic autopsies where they're actually looking for a murder. They're just looking to justify that the patient died as a result of their natural disease processes, and that's not really hard to do, okay? And you know what, nurse? When you look at the death certificate of these patients, it says they all died from natural causes. You know, they all seem to say that the patients died from myocardial infarction or some sort of heart ailment. You know, it's kind of universal. Oh, really amazing, okay? So let's see, this is what the autopsy means to see for oneself. Now, you know what, hospitals used to do autopsies all the time. It was the greatest teaching tool for other doctors. They don't do them anymore because nobody's going to pay for them. So they don't really do them anymore. Only 5% of hospital deaths resulted in autopsies, down from 50% in 1960. In 1998, the AMA issued a report stating that the cause of death is wrong 40% of the time. That's a pretty high percentage, wouldn't you say, to be wrong 40% of the time? And 40% of hospitals in the US don't perform any autopsies at all. Well, we don't need to. We have all these modern machines, these MRIs and all this kind of, we don't really need autopsies anymore. And then if you don't do it right, there could be some really victims here. And this is a very long story about an autopsy that went bad and wound up falsely accusing somebody. And, I don't know if you know this about medical examiners. Do you think that forensic autopsies, they're always done by medical examiners? Do you know in the United States we have something called the coroner system? Now, in some states, in order to be a coroner, you get elected. So in other words, you could be a gas station owner and you could be a coroner. You could actually own a funeral parlor, which most coroners are. They own funeral parlors. They're not physicians, all right? They're not forensic pathologists. There's a real shortage of forensic pathologists in this country. A real shortage. So an autopsy like this, that's performed by a coroner, I don't know. I wouldn't trust it myself. And then we talk about death certificates. Now, something very interesting happened. Death certificates are important, and people who look at medical statistics are reviewing death certificates to see maybe there's something terrible happening in our community. Maybe all these people are dying from something. So this is what happened here in New York, okay? All of a sudden, those people who look at death certificates said, my God, everyone in Staten Island seems to be dying from myocardial infarction. What the hell's going on here in Staten Island? Oh, I know, it must be that pollution from New Jersey coming over and killing everybody, right? No, it wasn't the pollution, it was actually fraud. It was actually fraud because the funeral directors, in a rush to get bodies into the ground, were forging these death certificates. And the only thing they knew to write was some kind of heart-related ailment. I've been preaching for years to anyone who will listen that death certificates are worthless, said Dr. Stephen Geller, former chief of pathology at Mount Sinai Medical Center. Wow. Autopsies are maybe not good. Death certificates are not good. Jesus, what next? Okay? And as it says here, when the death certificate admits the true cause of death, having accurate death records is a real big problem. So what happens when the police arrive? This is exactly what happens all over the world. Not just here in the United States, all over the world. You hear this. Thank you very much, officer, for coming here. We were concerned about these allegations as you are. So what we did is we appointed a board of our very best doctors and nurses. Sometimes we even did autopsies. We reviewed the death certificates. And we made the determination that all these patients died as a direct result of their natural disease processes. Now, if you want to continue the investigation after that, officer, be my guest. But how many police departments are at that point, with limited resources, are going to say, thank you very much, Mr. President of the hospital. I appreciate that. We'll take your report, and case closed. And this is why when I showed you the numbers of people that have been killed by medical serial killers, why the numbers are so horrific. Because a traditional serial killer, if there's such a thing, maybe kills 7 or 8 people. Amateurs compared to my medical serial killers, where the average killed maybe close to 60, and a number of them have killed over 100. A number of them have actually killed over 100. Well, let's take a look at some of these people here, okay? What a nice looking group of people. You know what? I always thought a serial killer would be like a Charles Manson type. Crazy haircut, a swastika on his forehead. Look at this nice good looking group of people, huh? It's like our neighbors. I mean, they just look wonderful. This cutie up here, this is Danielle. She's the one who took a selfie, with everyone that she went. And what was her motive? Well, you can't keep ringing that buzzer and ringing that buzzer and ringing that buzzer because they're going to start annoying people. So she says, well, I'll take care of them. And she took care of them. And then she took a picture. The fellow in the middle, Right now, he is the undisputed, undefeated champion of medical serial killers, having killed over 300 patients in England. And just to show you how difficult these cases are to make, he is the one and only physician in the history of Great Britain to be successfully criminally prosecuted for murdering his patients, going back to the Norman Conquest. Okay, he's the only one. The only one. He killed them with something called diamorphine, and he actually made house calls. And when you walk around with a detective in England like I did, and he says, Brucey killed somebody in that house, and somebody in that house, and somebody in that house. For over 20 years. Over 20 years. You know how he got caught? He decided to change the will of one of the elderly women that he murdered. That didn't go over well with the family. He made himself the beneficiary, as you can imagine. And that's what started it, and that's what started it, all right? Great. Harold Shipman hung himself in prison. Hung himself in prison. There's Niels Hogel, a German medical serial killer. And this is another pattern that I will show you all over the world. When Niels Hogel worked in one hospital, they suspected something. It seems like every time Niels Hogel was on duty, the death rate went up. And when he took off, the death rate went down. And you know what he loved? He loved the excitement of a code. And when I mean a code is the bells and whistles go going off, and patients in cardiac arrest come running in with the crash carts. It's very exciting. It's very exciting. And he loved that because otherwise he was bored the other time. So he actually loved that. And of course, if you cause the code, then you know when it's going to happen and you're ready to go. This is very common, by the way. We call them code junkies. So Niels Hogel, he worked in one hospital, and the one hospital said, oh my God, I think this guy is probably killing people. I got an idea, let's get him a job in another hospital. Okay, so he's out of our hair. He's out of our hair now. So he goes to another hospital, and the same things happen. The German police had to exhume over 150 bodies in 3 different countries. Okay. He finally confessed to killing over 100 patients. You know what? They kill so many people, they can't even remember themselves who their victims were. I mean, if you kill hundreds of people, you're going to remember their names, you can't even remember who they were. He couldn't even remember all of them. He didn't deny it, he just couldn't remember them. Now, how many people recognize him? All right, Charles Cullen. If you saw the movie or read the book, The Good Nurse, and the book is actually better than the movie. The Good Nurse, this is the story. Charles Cullen got out of the Navy, became a nurse. He started out in Pennsylvania, wound up in New Jersey. Hospital 1 suspected something. That didn't say anything to Hospital 2 that suspected something. That didn't say anything to Hospital 3 that suspected something. Or 4, or 5, or 6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or 10, or 11, until finally number 12. Finally, hospital number 12, when a very brave nurse went directly to the police because she was going to get the same answer from management that they got in number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Okay? Let's just move him on. So he's out of our hair. Let's just move him on. Charles Cullen, the Good Nurse, killed about 60 people. I don't even know how accurate these numbers are. I mean, we have to sometimes take their word for it, but we don't usually go around and exhume 60 bodies. I mean, we find I'll tell you how we do this. We find the very best cases, and then we work on them. But he's admitted to killing about 60 people. So when the police start the investigation, and you'll see this in the movie and in the book, they go back to Hospital 1. totally uncooperative to the police. Don't want to give them any records, don't want to give them their report of investigation, doesn't want to give them anything. Repeated by hospital 2, repeated by hospital 3, hospital 4, so forth and so on, all the way to the end. And the police say, look, we have an active investigation in hospital 12, and hospital 4 or 5 or 3, sometimes they did some pretty good investigations. And they determined that he was probably killing people, but they never called the police. They never reported to any authorities. Why? Because who's going to go to a hospital where the nurses are killing people intentionally? So, isn't it easier just to move him on? Kristen Gilbert. Now, Kristen Gilbert, a typical soccer mom. When I went to talk to her, she goes, oh, hi, Bruce. Yeah, I'm taking the kids to soccer. I'll talk to you when I come back. She killed about 30 of our nation's heroes at the Northampton VA Medical Center in Massachusetts, okay? She used epinephrine. Epinephrine is adrenaline. It'll speed up the heart, and if it's not used properly, you're a dead man or woman, okay? Interesting thing about her, the typical soccer mom, is if we had done we being the government, had done a really good investigation, we would have found out that she should have never really been working at the VA at all. That there were allegations of her starting fires, scolding children that were her patients, domestic problems, all kinds of problems she had, okay? But something interesting about her, she, like Niels, was a code junkie, loved the excitement of a code. And when you look in her evaluation, and this is true with many medical serial killers, when you look in their evaluations, you're like, okay, nurses, okay, doctors. Except when it comes to a code. That's when they get the A+. That's when they're really outstanding. She craved that excitement of the code. And also, something eerily familiar with Kristen Gilbert and the nurse from England, Lucy Ledby, the same thing happened. Why did Lucy Ledby put these children into danger and codes? Because it is stated that her boyfriend, who was a doctor, used to have to respond to every code. And this was thrilling to her. An opportunity to show off to her boyfriend her skills. And then have conversations afterwards. Oh, I feel so bad. I need you to comfort me. This was all Lucy Ledby's motive. Kristen Gilbert, every time there was a code, a VA police officer had to respond. That VA police officer was her boyfriend. And at the trial, there were actually witnesses who said, there was like grab-ass going on here during the code. I mean, they were touching one another. They were doing all kinds of things. It was like sort of a sexual experience for both Lucy and for her, Kristen Gilbert. Kristen Gilbert got sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And Kristen Gilbert's case was a death penalty case in a state that doesn't have the death penalty. Well, how does that happen? How does that happen? Okay? It happens because the crime occurred at a federal facility. So the federal law took it, and the federal government has a death penalty. If she had received the death penalty, she would have been the first woman executed since Ethel Rosenberg, the atomic bomb spy. Okay? But this is how it works. The trial lasted for 6 months. 6 months, experts back and forth, agents, witnesses, brave nurses. And talk about brave nurses. The nurses who brought this to our attention, they had human problems. Going through divorce. Some of them had substance abuse problems. They knew this was all going to come out. They knew it was all going to come out. It took a lot of courage. Really a lot of courage to come forward and testify against her. But they did. And do you know that after she was found guilty and sentenced, and these nurse heroes went back to the Northampton VA, you think they were received as heroes?
No.
Just the opposite. What did you do to us? What did you do to the reputation of this hospital? You know, when people drove by our hospital, they used to say, oh, that's the VA hospital. They take wonderful care of our veterans. You know what they say now because of you two? They say, this is where that nurse killer worked. This is a terrible place. You ruined our jobs, you ruined our careers, you ruined this hospital. That's the thanks they have for having the courage to come forward. So now the trial is over, and the question is, does she get the death penalty or not? There's actually a separate death penalty trial by the same jury. Right after the jury convicted her of these murders, they immediately go into a death penalty trial, and it's up to the jury to decide as to whether or not she should receive the death penalty for these murders. Very emotional. Because, you know, when we talk about the statistics, we talk about 100 murders, 30 murders, 50 murders, we forget there's a whole human side of this. There's a families, parents, brothers, sisters. You know, we could talk about these statistics, but we have to take a moment just to think about the human side of this. And you know when you really see the human side of it? When it comes to these sentences. Because that's when the family gets up and has an opportunity to talk about dad or mom, or talk about the victim. And to hear them say, you know, dad served in Korea and Vietnam, only to be murdered in a VA hospital. It was very, very emotional and very, very moving. Well, she didn't get the death penalty, but she got life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, which was fine for me, but you wouldn't know it if you read the newspapers who thought we were like crazed Gestapo people who wanted to hang her in the town square. And nothing could be further from the truth. We were actually kind of happy that she didn't get the death penalty. But she's gone. Now the last guy here, my personal favorite, Dr. Michael Swango, Northport, Long Island, Northport VA Medical Center. So I'm sitting at my desk one day, and I get a phone call from the chief of psychiatry at the Northport VA, and she says, hey Bruce, you're not gonna believe this. We have a doctor who's working here who actually spent time in prison for poisoning people. I looked at the phone, I looked at the calendar, is this April 1st? Is this like an April Fool's joke or something? So you telling me that we actually have a doctor at the Northport VA who spent time in prison for poisoning people? What about that background investigations? What about all those checks we do? Well, come out here and see for yourself. So I hop in the car, and on the way there I learned all about Michael Swango. Now when Michael Swango was in medical school, he was known as 00 Swango, licensed to kill, because his fellow students suspected him of murdering patients. They couldn't prove it, but they suspected him of it, and they went to the dean, and they said, Dean, I don't think this guy, Michael Swango, should be a physician. And the dean said, what do you know? You're only students. I'm the dean. I think he just needs a little more education, a little more training. So they hold him back for 6 months, and he goes to an internship at Ohio State University Medical Center. Good hospital, good hospital. And guess what happens? Patients start dying unexpectedly. And one patient, a young gymnast student at Ohio State, her name was Cynthia McGee. Cynthia McGee gets in a car accident with another student, and she's actually improving until she gets a visit from Michael Swango, and then she expires unexpectedly. But he doesn't get charged with the murder. You know who gets charged with the murder? The student who hit her with his car, he gets charged with vehicular homicide. But he didn't kill Cynthia McGee. This guy here, he killed Cynthia McGee. Well, the hospital does an investigation and they can't prove anything. So So Swango moves on, he moves on to his first love, which was being an emergency medical technician, because he loved the excitement. He loved multi-car accidents. He loved all that gore and blood. All right? And one day, he goes in the office and he says, guys and girls, my fellow EMTs, you guys work so hard, have some donuts. I bought you some donuts. So he gives them a box of donuts. And they go home and they all look deathly ill. Because see, he had sprinkled them with arsenic. He had sprinkled them with arsenic. And he calls each one of them up and he says, tell me your symptoms. Tell me everything that's wrong with you, okay? Because this is his second bite of excitement at the apple. The first bite of excitement is actually putting the poison on the donuts. The second bite of excitement, pardon the pun, is actually hearing how they suffered as a result of eating this. Well, these EMTs are not stupid. Oh no. About a month later, he comes back, he says, hey guys, you work so hard, I got this iced tea for you. Why don't you have some iced tea? I said, thanks a lot, Doc. You know, leave it over there, we'll have some later. They have it tested and it's loaded with arsenic. They call the police do a good job. He gets arrested, gets sentenced to 3 years in jail for poisoning his coworkers. Now, I didn't know that in the United States of America, anyone could spend 3 years in jail for poisoning people and come out and be a physician again, but I was wrong. Wrong once again, wrong, because that's exactly what he did. You know, being a sociopath, psychopath, whatever path you want to use, he was very, very charming, all right? Very, very charming. So he convinced people of this lie. He convinced them that he was in jail because being an ex-Marine, which he was a tough guy, he got in a barroom brawl, and he got 6 months in jail. But the governor of the state restored his civil rights. Here's a piece of paper, a forgery. Here's a piece of paper from the governor saying my civil rights are restored. And they said, fine, come on down. And eventually, he winds his way to the Northport VA Medical Center. But before that, he's working at the VA on the West Coast, and he meets this young lady, and they get engaged, and everything is beautiful, until a story comes out in the local papers that this guy spent time in jail for poisoning his coworkers, and then everything goes bad. And the fiancée, her name was Kristen Kenny, she says, you know, I love this guy, Michael Swango, but I just can't stay with him. I love him so much, but I have to leave and I have to go home. And then when she goes home, she says, you know, when I was living with Michael, I was getting these headaches. But I'm not getting them anymore. And then one day, the doorbell rings and Swango appears, and he charms his way back into her life because he was very charming. And then one day she goes to the local park, she takes out a gun and blows her brains out. Well, you can't blame Swango for that, can you? You can. You can, because even though her body was cremated, we tested a lock of her hair, it was loaded with arsenic. Yes, Swango was even poisoning his own fiancée. Well, to make a long story somewhat shorter, he winds up at the Northport VA Medical Center. How did that happen? How did a guy with a background like that wind up taking care of our nation's heroes? Well, Stony Brook Medical Center has a teaching arrangement with the VA, and they put residents through Stony Brook. So Stony Brook actually does the background, and they send them over to the VA, which is fine, which works out well. But do you know what his residency was in? Anybody want to take a guess? His residency was in psychiatry. That meant he had to go in front of a board of trained psychiatrists and convince each one of them that he should be in the program. Now, how's that for charm, huh? And he did. And he did. So when I finally went out to visit him, he starts giving me the same story. Oh, it was a barroom brawl, blah, 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 blah. Well, let me tell you, this guy was so handsome and charming. If I didn't know better, I'd want to introduce him to my own daughter. If she brought home, this guy said, oh, look, Dad, he's a doctor in the VA. You know, this handsome ex-Marine doctor. Come on in, join the family. Wow, what a great catch. Who would ever think, right? Who would ever think? And then I asked him for, and he's so charming until I asked him for permission to search his room. And then he's not so charming anymore. And then he forces us to leave, and the next day he's gone. He hops on a plane and he goes to Zimbabwe, Africa. In Zimbabwe, Africa is a real shortage of doctors. You know? And when he's in Zimbabwe, he kills women and children and pregnant women and anyone that could be a target of opportunity for him. Well, it's time for him to come back because he has to renew his passport. And we arrest him, but not for murder, because we didn't really have any evidence that he murdered anybody at the VA, all right? We arrested him for every federal agent's favorite crime, lying to the government. If you lie to the government or lie to an agent, that is a felony. And he got sentenced based on that, on those lies to the government, to 5 years in jail. And that gave us an opportunity to try to determine if he had actually murdered anybody right here at the Northport VA Medical Center. Now, I had never done a homicide case before in my life. I was strictly basically a white-collar crime guy. I did a drug diversion and other cases, but never a homicide case. And my boss said, Bruce, don't worry about it. We're going to hook you up with the right person. I don't know how many of you remember that show, Autopsy, Dr. Michael Baden, the forensic medical examiner. He's on TV like every hot case, you know. And I met him, and he said, don't worry, Bruce, I'm going to teach you how to do this. And this was like learning physics from Albert Einstein. I mean, you just couldn't get a more knowledgeable person. He says, this is what we're going to do. I want you to pull every medical record of every patient that was at the Northport VA when Swango was there, all right? And then we're going to assemble a team, and this is who's going to be on the team. The team is going to be himself as a forensic pathologist, couldn't get any better than that, toxicologist, physicians who are trained in chart review. And they can look at a chart and they can make a pretty good determination if the patient should have expired when they did, okay? And also at that time, a relatively new profession called forensic nursing. These are nurses that are trained in both forensic science and the science of nursing. They were phenomenal. They were like the best on the team. They were just amazing. And we narrowed it down to about 6 really good cases where we felt these patients should not have expired when they did. So what do we do next? Well, Bruce, you gotta dig up the bodies. Whoa, what? Yeah, he says, we have to do an exhumation. He said, look, Bruce, you don't ask a barber if you need a haircut, and you don't ask a forensic pathologist if you need an exhumation. You need an exhumation. So the next thing you know, I find myself at the cemeteries with a backhoe. And it's digging up all the dirt, and it's digging up the ground, and the coffin comes up. But could you imagine, before we did that, we had to go to the families and ask them for permission to do that. Even though we had a court order, we wanted their permission. And the families were just amazing. They were just wonderful. But could you imagine getting a visit like this? Hi, my name is Bruce Sackman. I'm from the Department of Veterans Affairs Inspector General. We have reason to believe that your dad's death was of a suspicious nature. Can we go to the cemetery with your permission and dig up his body and run tests, and then we'll replace his body? Imagine getting a visit like that. That's something you'd never forget, huh? But the families were just wonderful. Sometimes they wanted to be there. You know, sometimes they wanted to be at the exhumation. They actually wanted to witness it themselves, which was fine with us. My agents would bring flowers to the daughters or the moms, you know, and the families were just great. So we dig the body up, the coffin comes up, and then I see Michael Baden jumping into the gravesite. What the hell is he doing? He's taking soil samples because he wants to see if there's arsenic in the soil. If there's arsenic in the soil and arsenic in the body, they're going to claim that the reason why there's arsenic in the body is because it's seeped in from the soil. So then I'm at the Suffolk County Medical Examiner's Office. That's a cultural experience, boy, I'm telling you. Bodies are cut open and body parts are on the side of them. But they were really wonderful. So now it's time for Swango to get out of jail, and boy, he's just ready to hop on that plane. His next stop was going to be Saudi Arabia. That was going to be his next. Not so fast, not so fast. Because we had made a determination that these patients were actually murdered with two drugs. Succinylcholine, which is a paralytic. If they want to put a tube down you, it actually paralyzes you. In the hospital, they call it sucks, so they can put this tube down you. And epinephrine, that we talked about before. Well, how did we discover this? Well, we first went to the FBI lab and they said, wait, we're not interested. We're not interested. So we had to find a private lab in Pennsylvania called National Medical Services. And I said, are you going to be able to find traces of epinephrine and succinylcholine in embalmed tissue? Yeah. You see, Bruce, we got this new machine. It's called the high-profile liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometer. Holy cow. How's it work? Bruce, you wouldn't understand. You couldn't understand. We put a little sample, it goes around like this, it comes out, boom, epinephrine, boom, okay. So I go ready to get out of jail. We say, okay, Doc, not so fast. You're being charged with murdering veterans at the VA hospital in Northport. And let me tell you this. If you go to trial, and even if you win, let me tell you what just happened. The United States just entered into an extradition treaty with the government of Zimbabwe. They are dying to get their hands on you. Okay? So you know what? Even if you beat us here, we're just going to put you in a plane and drop you off on the tarmac somewhere in Zimbabwe. Good luck. Well, he decided to plead guilty. All right? He decided to plead guilty. Right here in the federal court, right here on Long Island, is in front of Judge Mishler, and Judge Mishler asked him, oh, what exactly did you do? And he said, I murdered people using a paralytic. He didn't say which one. He just said a paralytic. And the family was there. Could you imagine being there and this guy, this doctor, is saying how they killed your father? I mean, could you imagine that? How tough that is for them? And Swango's attorney is putting his hands around Swango like he was a victim of some kind. It was the most nauseating thing I ever really saw. So Judge Mishler sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And later he also admitted to killing Cynthia McGee, so those charges against the other student were dismissed. But Judge Mishler said something I had never heard before or since. Judge Mishler said, Dr. Swango, I'm sentencing you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Right now, there's no parole in the federal system. If Congress should change the law, your parole is denied in advance. So there's no way this guy is getting out. No way. And he's in Supermax Federal Penitentiary.
Where?
Okay?
Colorado, I think.
So when I first got started with these cases, I said, gee, you know, I've never really done a homicide case. And how hard could these cases be? I know. Oh, what my favorite TV detective does, or whatever he does, all kinds of
Lieutenant Colombo, yes ma'am, a homicide.
Oh, that's my absolute favorite TV. Yeah. Now let's compare a Colombo crime scene to a typical hospital crime scene, okay?
Mother, oh God, mother, run,
run! Right there, right? The body is right there, and Colombo's examining the body, and all the medical experts are examining the body. And look what else we have. We have the lab boys, right? We have DNA and thisology and thatology. I mean, come on. How hard could this be, okay? But let's take a look at a typical hospital crime scene, shall we? Wait, hold on a second. Wait a minute. Hold on. There is no body. In fact, the crime scene has been scrubbed to surgical standards. So what's CSI and all these guys gonna do now? Okay? Look at this. This is the crime scene that I used to walk into, where the person was buried, or sometimes even cremated. This is the crime scene that investigators are faced with more times than not when it comes to medical serial killers, because the cases are old and people have been buried or moved, all right? So one of the things we decided to do is come up with red flags to try to teach our staff what's common among all these serial killers and how do we go about detecting them before they kill more and more people. And like I said, almost every case around the world starts like this. Every time Nurse Bruce is on duty, the death rate goes up. Nurse Bruce takes a day off, the death rate goes down. Doesn't mean Nurse Bruce is a serial killer, oh no. But it means we need to start looking, right? Just to start looking, that's all. They all seem to like, pardon the pun, the graveyard shift, that 3 a.m. shift, you know, when there's like really nobody around for the most part. In the case of Kristen Gilbert, and I always invite everyone to read the court transcripts because they don't believe me when I tell them the story. Kristen Gilbert goes to her supervisor and says, supervisor, if patient Kenneth Cutting should expire around 6:15 tonight, can I go home early? I'm not kidding. And the supervisor says, oh, we don't expect Kenneth Cutting to expire. But if he does, I suppose you could go home early. Guess what happens at 6:15? He expires and she goes home early. And this is actually part of the trial transcript. And in the newspapers as well. It was just an incredible story. Incredible story, okay? And look, if you ever had someone in the hospital that was extraordinarily ill and near death, you knew it, the staff knew it, it wasn't really unexpected, all right? But in these cases, it's just the opposite. These patients are doing fine, sometimes they're even improving. And the kids would say, oh, we can leave Dad and go on vacation, he's actually getting better, only to get a phone call, usually from the killer, saying, oh, your dad expired unexpectedly last night. Okay? And why is it usually from the killer? Because that's their second bite of excitement. The first bite is actually killing the person. The second bite is sort of torturing the families, if you will, and letting them know how Dad lived that last half hour. And Swango used to love this. This was like his greatest thrill, okay? Look at this one. Nurse accused of killing at least 13 patients at state-run Italian hospital by giving them the deadly blood thinner, heparin, all right? This is what I find most interesting. The first line. A probe was launched last year after statistical anomalies. How would you like to be a statistical anomaly? Or have someone in your family be a statistical anomaly? Well, flagged in the anesthesia and intensive care departments of the hospital, a nurse is accused of killing 13 patients. Jesus, how many people have to die before we wake up and start doing these investigations? 13 patients. These are all news stories. I'm not making this up, okay? We talked about the death certificates, how useless they are. We talked about the initial review that management does just to protect the hospital, just to protect themselves, okay? This is also amazing. Allegations surface, and do you think that they would take the nurse out of patient care? No, they allow the nurse to stay in patient care, even their allegations. You know what happens? They start getting nicknames like, she's the angel of death, she's this, she's that. And they're still working there. So if I was introducing my staff, I could go, this is Nurse Jones, this is Nurse Smith, this is the angel of death. Incredible. Incredible. So finally, we get wind of it from the brave whistleblowers who were so frustrated with management, they actually pick up the phone and they call the authorities, okay? Now, chances of there being an eyewitness saying that I saw Nurse Bruce kill this patient is just about zero. Now, sometimes, you know, as years go by and memories change, people tend to think they saw something, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but generally, this has not worked, okay? This is the best it gets. I saw Nurse Bruce before that patient expired. He went in that room, he pulled that curtain behind him, and that patient expired 30 minutes later. It's about as good as it gets, okay? And the weapon of choice is usually a sudden death chemical, because on the crash cart, there are at least 40 chemicals that will kill you, okay? Now let me ask you here, does anybody have a background in chemistry or medicine or anything like that? Okay. This is a tough one. Do you know what this symbol is in chemistry? No. This symbol is actually my grade in chemistry in high school. Okay? Now, I put this up here, not just to embarrass myself in front of people all over the world, is just to show you how easily I could be duped by science, by the language, by the administration. I got what did I get? 67. I'm probably happy I got that. 67 in chemistry in high school. I'm gonna start telling a doctor that he murdered people? Who the hell am I to do that? With a 67 in chemistry. That's why no one investigator, him or herself, could do this case. It really takes a team of people to do it. Okay? If you get lucky, rare, and if you could find these syringes, IV lines, and feeding tubes, that's where you're going to find trace evidence of the poison that was put in. Most of the time, that stuff winds up in the sharps container and gets as it would. Okay? Now, this was interesting. Many times, the EKG strips are missing from the patient's charts. Now, why would that be? Well, because the EKG strip is sort of a roadmap as to what happened. And that can tell us the patient's doing it. Then all of a sudden, you see this, all right? But the killers always tend to look to remove these EKG strips because they don't want to leave this bit of evidence for us. And that was always a red flag. We go up the EKG strips and say, yep, they're missing, okay? And like I say, they love to perform in the emergency. This is their time to shine. This is when they're superstars. The rest of the time, they're just part of the crowd. But when it comes to a code, they're superstars, and they want to be superstars as much as they can be. Okay? And they could be very charming, I told you, Swango, or very friendly. But when you start doing backgrounds, and then you find out they attempt to kill their fiancée, Kristen Gilbert tried to murder her husband. I mean, there are a lot of issues with these people, okay? Now, Swango used to love to walk around with his scrubs on all the time, even when he was off duty. And he had this very strange habit. He'd go in the nurse's room, lie on the floor in a prone position, and talk on the phone. What does it mean? I have no idea. Just one of the weird things they would do. And when you look at their reviews, what do they get? Great reviews when it comes to codes. The rest of their reviews, not so good. Just average, okay? And prior employment records, see, this is the problem with not doing a good background investigation. Because, look at Cohen. Went through 12 hospitals until he got caught. Pretty pathetic, huh? Pretty pathetic. And we talked about the names that they get. Now, also, before the internet, it seems that these killers used to love to research the particular drug they were going to use. So you would always find federal agents going to the local library because we would find out that they would take out books on succinylcholine, epinephrine, even though they used it all the time. they would actually take out books on this, okay? Now look, the definition of poisoning is too much of anything. That's the definition of poisoning. Poisoning is non-confrontational. It's not like two people are yelling and screaming and throwing chairs at each other and then one minute somebody's poisoned. It's a very quiet death. Perfect really for a hospital setting, okay? And they all have the same defense at first. The patients all died as a result of their natural disease processes. And they never show remorse for the victims. Why? Because they couldn't care about the victims. It's not about the victims. It's what the act does for them. The excitement it does them. The victims, well, they're just a means to the end, okay? And other patients complain about subject, but their complaints are ignored because we know that they all have what? Hospital delirium. Right? That's why they're ignored, okay? Kristen Gilbert, every day of the trial, she couldn't wait for the next newspaper, the day's newspaper to come so she could read about herself, craving the notoriety. And we find out that they attempted to kill outside of the hospital as well. Not all, but many, okay? So I'm sitting in my office, and one of my agents run in and they say, "Hey Bruce, did you see today's New York Post?" I love the New York Post. Jailed Squeaky's lesbian lust. Kristen Gilbert, a former Northampton, Mass. Veterans Affairs nurse, was convicted in 2001 of poisoning 4 patients in her care. Now she is said to be carrying on a caged heat affair with none other than Charles Manson's former groupie, Squeaky Fromm. So you see, out of all the people in the prison that she could hook up with, she made sure she hooked up with somebody that increased her notoriety even when she's in prison. All right? Can't help it. Can't stop that desire for notoriety. And in fact, if you're interested, you could actually write her. You say you could write her. If you're inclined to unearth my intellect at birth, don't be remote, just send me a note. She's a poet and a serial killer. Really, very talented. Here she is. Now, does that look like the face of a serial killer? I mean, seriously. There she is. Okay, so why do they kill? Why do they kill, okay? I would say, in my opinion, these two are probably numero uno and numero dos. The first one being something called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Munchausen syndrome is a person will intentionally harm themselves and go into a hospital because they're looking for for compassion and understanding, all right? Munchausen syndrome by proxy is sometimes a mother will actually intentionally harm a child, bring that child into the hospital to try to show the staff what a caring, wonderful parent they are, even though they had actually harmed the child to begin with. So Munchausen syndrome by proxy, many medical serial killers throughout the world actually have been diagnosed with this. All right, they will intentionally put patients into harm so they could show the staff what a wonderful, outstanding, compassionate, intelligent caregiver they are, and how they're so much better than everybody else, particularly when it comes to code. Now, some people, like Swango, I think he just craved the power of life and death over someone. It is an incredible power. It is an incredible power. Especially when you get away with murder after murder after murder. And no one even challenged you. In fact, the management's actually defending you. Wow. That's something, huh? And we saw that the nurse in Italy, and there's actually a case in the United States as well, where, I'm just sick of this patient. This patient is just a real pain in my butt. This patient's not going to bother anybody anymore. And that was the case with the nurse in Italy, and there's a case here in the United States as well as that. In very rare instances, there is a profit motive in it, particularly in the case of Harold Shipman, who changed the will and made himself the beneficiary, right? That's pretty rare. There was one case of a medical serial killer that said he needed the overtime, so he put people into code so then he'd have to stay and work on them, and then he could get the overtime. That's what he said. I don't believe it, but that's what he said. And how about this one? This is a case going on in Texas right now. Hey, you know what? I'm the best doctor in this hospital. And they took away my privileges. They did things to harm me. Well, you know what? I'm going to show them this hospital can't exist without a doctor like me. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to look at some of their other patients, and I'm going to take care of those patients. And then the hospital's going to see that I was right and they were wrong. And there's a case ongoing right now as we speak, I'll show you, in Texas, involving a doctor who did just that. And here we go to financial. Homicidal hospice CEO in Texas ordered nurses to execute patients by overdosing medication and cruel cost-saving plan. What? Yeah, you see, if you're in hospice and the hospice takes you too early, apparently, not only won't you get paid, but you could get fined for taking the patient too early. So you know what? We're not going to take any patients too early, are we? And if this patient here, we're not going to get paid for her after September 1st, you know what's going to happen then, right? This patient's not going to be with us anymore, okay? And that's exactly what happened here. Because in order to avoid fines and make money, they killed these patients.
It's over here.
Coronavirus. What a great opportunity for me to kill people during a coronavirus. Oh, wonderful opportunity, okay? Think about what happened during coronavirus. The first thing they said, no families are allowed in the hospital. Wow. No families. You know, we have a real shortage of nurses, and we have to bring nurses and doctors in, traveling nurses and doctors in. Some of them may not really understand our systems and everything, so there may be logical reasons why things go wrong until they become up to snuff. What a great time to kill people. This case is ongoing right now, and there's another case ongoing, I'll show you in a minute, that has to do with this guy. Nice guy, doesn't he? I mean, 3 more murder charges. More, that seems to be a very common phrase here. 3 more murder charges and patients' deaths. During all 4 patients died of COVID-19, or did they? Or did they? Some doctors and law enforcement go, no, they did not. This case is still ongoing right now as we speak. I don't know what's going to happen with this. We'll see. We'll see. Janine Jones was America's baby killer. She was a nurse that was America's baby. See, we have our own baby killers. We don't have to go to anyone for that. And this is what she says. She says, what happens to the patient does not matter to the caretakers. What matters is what the incident does for them. They don't care about the patient. They don't care, okay? And this is one of my favorite. My favorite of all time, Donald Harvey. Donald Harvey was a medical serial killer who killed people in the VA, and he killed people in private hospitals as well. And it's very interesting to hear what he says. Why did you kill? Well, people controlled me for 18 years, and then I controlled my own destiny. I controlled other people's lives, whether they live or die. I had that power to control. And this is the line that really sinks in. After I didn't get caught for the first 15, the first 15, imagine killing people, 15 people, and nobody's even questioning you. I thought it was my right. I appointed myself judge, prosecutor, and jury, so I played God. Well, you know what? If you kill 15 people and nobody even questioned it, maybe it's not so crazy to think that you're ordained by the Almighty to kill people. After all, you're killing people left and right, nobody's even questioning it. That was Donald Harvey, okay? So when we do the investigation, I'm gonna run through this really quickly, because this is really more for the cops, but this is the team. This is everybody. I don't care if you're the reincarnation of Sherlock Holmes, you could not do this case yourself. You need a team of people, and these are the people, particularly, you see that there are a couple of people on here that are not normally on the team, and I'll talk about one in particular, okay? And we tell them, seize everything if you can, if it's there. It may not be there, all right? Now, remember that picture I showed you of the hospital crime scene, and everything was corrupt to surgical standards? You know, there still could be evidence there. You have to know where to look. Took me a long time to learn, okay? It's in these electronic devices, okay? In the central stations. And these are just an idea of some of the devices that have electronic information stored in there, or sometimes they're stored in the cloud. But cops don't know this. Cops don't know to ask this. When they go in the hospital, they'll say, I want to see the director of security, and I want to see the head nurse. They forget to, or they don't know to ask for the most important person, the biomedical engineer, the man or woman who knows how all this shit works. It's incredible. And they know how to extract all the data. They know how to store the data. They're actually one of the most important people. But cops aren't going to know this. They're not trained to know this. And we just tell them, if it prints, if there's an alarm, there's data. Okay? And these are the weapons of the world's great medical serial killers. You know, I don't know if this is in order, but this is what I kind of see. Number one is insulin. You know, if you get insulin and you shouldn't be having insulin, you're going to die. Succinylcholine, the paralytic, epinephrine, adrenaline, injecting air into the arteries, that's becoming pretty common these days, okay? The heart medication, the Joxin, that's what actually our friend from New Jersey used. He used the Joxin. And then tampering with existing equipment and medication. Those are the big things. So we tell people they have to collect all the evidence from everybody. Anybody and everybody who's there, okay? And we look at the statistics. But you can't convict someone on statistics alone. It's just a start, okay? And then, as you can see, Dr. Michael Bauman there, then comes the exhumations, okay? And the interviews of everybody. You can see how long these cases take. The average case takes like 2 years from start to finish to go through this stuff, all right? Some cases last longer. Here's the one, she just pled guilty about a week or two ago. Notice the drug she used? Look familiar? Succinylcholine, there it is right there. Okay? 20 years later, well, better late than never. And remember I told you about that doctor that was taking out other doctors' patients because he was unhappy the way he was treated? Here he is. Allegedly tampering with IV drugs, leaving one colleague dead and putting at least 11 other patients in danger. He's on trial right now. Right now. I want to be left in peace. These patients with their buzzer, they drive me crazy. Here you go.
Cover his face.
That's the motive. Right there. You know what? These patients are better off dead. I'm actually doing them a favor. I am, see? I'm actually doing, I should get a medal. I shouldn't be prosecuted. I'm actually doing them a favor by killing them. That's a relatively new one. Did anybody see this in the newspaper not long ago about these phony nursing certificates? I almost fell off the chair when I read this thing. You know, 7,600 bogus nursing, how many? 7,600? how many nurses were working with this in the government as well as outside of the government. It's an incredible, incredible story. National Health Service, my friend in England, she worked there for 20 years until somebody found out that she wasn't really as credible as she claimed she was. Well, let's talk about the future, okay? You know, medicine is dramatically changing. Everything now has an IT component to it. On my last job, there was so much IT, I actually had to be tied to the hip with a biomedical engineer because I couldn't even understand half of these systems and everything that I was supposed to investigate. But look what we have here. Drug infusion pumps and all these other devices, they're hooked up to the internet. And when something's hooked up to the internet, that means something could be hacked, right? Yeah. As a matter of fact, we have this thing now, it's called the Internet of Bodies. All these implantable devices that are internet-based. You know, Vice President Cheney had a pacemaker that was internet-based, and the Secret Service had him remove it because he said it could be hacked and someone could change the setting on your pacemaker. And the manufacturers, I must say, haven't been all that good with security. They're more interested in just getting these devices to market. They haven't really been good with internet security. Now, I don't know if anyone has been murdered through the internet. Depends who you talk to. I talk to my friends in Health and Human Services, and they go, Bruce, it never happened. I talk to my friends who are attorneys in this field, and they go, Bruce, it has happened, but nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to admit it. I don't know. I don't even know what they tell me. Is it possible? Yeah, I've seen demonstrations how these devices can be altered through the internet. Whether anyone's actually been murdered through it, I just don't know. All right? Can hackers commit the perfect murder by sabotaging an artificial pancreas? Well, here it is. They tell you exactly how it can be done. Isn't this scary? Isn't this scary? As if there isn't enough to worry about in the hospitals. Now we have this, ransomware. We all know, we've seen ransomware, right? When these computer hackers, they break into a system and they seize all the records so the hospital can't access their records. Do you know how much money has been paid out by American hospitals last year for ransomware? $60 million have been paid out to hackers for ransomware, okay? The last hospital I worked in, they spent millions of dollars on cyber defense, millions of dollars. But if you're a small rural hospital somewhere, like the Sisters of Divine Compassion, and you're barely keeping the lights on, and you don't have money for this defense, but this is what happened in Germany. Patients in ambulance going to the hospital gets a call. Do not take this patient here, we were just hacked, we cannot access our records. Take the patient to another hospital, which was 30 minutes away, and the patient died. Are those hackers guilty of murder? In my opinion, they are. They are, all right? But this is what we're facing here. This is the future. This is what the next generation of investigators is going to have to deal with. Internet hacking and internet murders. So I'm just going to leave you with this, and then we'll take
Just one more thing.
Now, this was a case in New York where a doctor had murdered his wife, chopped up the body, took her in a small plane, dumped the body off in the Atlantic Ocean, but got caught later because he started bragging about it like an idiot. And this is what the prosecutor said, and I think it's so perfect. No body, no forensics, no murder weapon, no bloody clothes, no fingerprints, no brain matter, no body parts. All right? Welcome to the world of medical serial killers. Now, if you want...
You got mail, baby, yeah.
If you want, I have a couple of copies of this book if anybody's interested in buying it. This is the book, it's on Amazon and anything else you'd want. It goes into great detail about the murders that I talked about. It's a quick read, you read it really quickly, but it'll really take you into what it takes to investigate these cases and successfully prosecute people, all right? And if you're not into reading, you can watch this show on TV, you know, on HLN, Very Scary People. It's a 2-part series about Dr. Swango from Long Island. Doesn't cost a cent. It's very interesting. And if you still haven't had enough, God bless you. Here's one of the most recent podcasts I did, and you could hear me talk about these murders on the podcast. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions or anything at all? No? All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.